Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. Talk about Blu-rays here. Today I'm talking about a couple Criterion Blu-rays. One is a 4K, but I'm going to start with the Blu-ray. And it is one that I have wanted an upgrade on for some time because it is a really neat low-budget noir called Blast of Silence. And it is from 1961, black and white, and I think it's really neat. This is coming out on Blu-ray now, right around the time that David Fincher's The Killer has come out on Netflix and some theaters, because they're very interestingly similar films in a lot of ways, in that they're both about hitmen, and both have sort of an internal look at the hitmen characters through voiceover. Now, in The Killer, it is the main character's voiceover, his own thoughts, and there's very little dialogue. This is similar, except this is more narrated. It is, well, let me just... Swift, brutal, and black-hearted, Alan Barron's New York City noir Blast of Silence is a sensational surprise. This low-budget, carefully crafted portrait of a hitman on assignment in Manhattan during Christmas time follows its stripped-down narrative with mechanical precision, yet also with an eye and ear for the oddball details of urban living and the imposing beauty of the city. At once visually ragged and artfully composed, and featuring rough, poetic narration performed by Lionel Stander and written by Waldo Salt, both uncredited. Waldo Salt, of course, a great screenwriter who, there's an actual award, the Waldo Salt Award for great screenplays. So a good writer to have on your movie. Blast of Silence is a stylish triumph. Now, it is a really neat performance. Alan Barron himself plays Frank Bono, the hitman, and I do like that it is set against the Christmas time season in New York, so it's a rare Christmas noir. I like Christmas noirs quite a bit, and it's really captivating, in part because of the performance and because of the way it's shot. Alan Barron was, a first-time filmmaker, and did a really good job with this, and he had just a great eye, and it's really, there's something about it that just really sticks with me. But that Lionel Stander narration is neat because it almost adds this level of, it's like an omniscient narration. It's almost talking to the character, but it's also got his thoughts too, so it feels very novelistic. It feels like a hard-boiled pulp book that we're experiencing put into audio-visual form. And I think it's part of the reason I love it. Because sometimes it's speaking directly to Frank Bono, and sometimes it's about him, or it's about his experiences. So it's a really neatly handled narration. Some people don't like narration, but I think it really works for this movie. The whole movie is just like a pulp noir story. And even in a world of noirs where there are a bunch about hitmen, including things like Murder by Contract, which I really like. There's no other film really like Blast of Silence, as far as I know of. It's really special in that way. Alan Barron, like I said, plays the hitman himself. He gets an assignment. He ends up back in New York. He is trying to get a silencer for his gun. He has to get armed because he didn't bring any of that with him. And that ends up causing, ultimately, a mistake to happen, which is another tie-in to The Killer. Not to spoil too much in The Killer, but there is a mistake that happens in The Killer that sort of sets things off, and this is about a hitman who makes a mistake as well. So that screws things up. Then he ends up seeing a girl that he used to know, and that sort of entangles him more, and it becomes an issue of, like, can he get the job done properly, or is he too distracted and off his game? We'll see what happens. Peter Falk was supposed to play the lead role, but he ended up dropping out to do Murder, Inc. in 1960, so that left Alan Barron himself as a very cheap option to use And I think it was the right choice. Peter Falk in this would be great, but there's something about having Alan Barron, who we don't know and we've never attached anything to him, that makes it feel more real somehow. And I really love that about it. So I love the Christmas set stuff, the holiday decorations, and there's like Christmas carols being sung kind of in the background on the soundtrack, songs of goodwill and kindness that play counter to the story of this man on a mission to kill. I always like to read a little bit from the booklet essay. This is cool because it actually also includes a short graphic novel, sort of comic book version of the movie, at least parts of it. Just a couple pages, but it's really cool to see. And that's also neat as an interesting tie-in to The Killer again, which is adapted, I think, from a graphic novel, which is kind of cool. So anyway, Blast of Silence. Bad Trip by Terrence Rafferty. Alan Barron's stark, moody Blast of Silence, 1961, is a movie of many strange distinctions. It's among the last of the true film noirs. Oh, that's true, too. It's late in the cycle that way. Those fatalistic black and white urban crime dramas that darkened the American screen so gloriously in the years after World War II. It was, along with Cassavetes' Shadows from 1959, Shirley Clark's The Connection from 61, one of the first of the independent, low-budget movies that suggested the existence of a uniquely New York style of filmmaking, documentary-like and expressively unpolished. The Blast of Silence has much more plot and much more tightly constructed screenplay than Cassavetes and Clark would likely have felt comfortable with. It's among the very few works in the history of cinema to boast a voiceover narration in the second person. And it is, hands down, the best movie ever made about a common, important, and unjustly neglected American experience, the bad business trip. I like that idea. The film's protagonist, Frankie Bono, played by Barron, who also wrote and directed, is a Cleveland hitman with a contract to terminate, for reasons he neither knows nor cares to know, a middle management New York mobster named Troiano. The killer comes to town by rail, arriving appropriately at Penn Station, which was like him, doomed. Less than 5 years after Blast of Silence was shot, the old station was we see in the opening scenes was demolished. Frankie doesn't blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go too further because he starts to spoil some things, but it's this little bit here I'm going to read. The whole movie, in fact, has a melancholy aura of something displaced, of a traveling salesman's loneliness. Frankie's big city business trip leaves him, as such excursions often do, with a lot of empty hours, too much time to kill. Anyway, a nice essay that's included here. And so this had gotten a DVD, and we're getting a lot of the same stuff here, except now this is a new 4K digital presentation that they present in 2 aspect ratios. You can watch it in 1.85 to 1 widescreen and 1.33 to 1 full screen. I don't think the original DVD had that option. And I looked at both, and they both look pretty good. Usually when you have the 1.85, it's like it really zoomed in on the grain and it looks a little rougher, but I think the 1.33 was basically an open matte, and they've sort of matted the 1.85 over the 1.33, so it doesn't look too zoomed in. It looks good. In terms of features, I think these were all included on the original DVD, but they're great. Requiem for a Killer, the making of Blast of Silence, which is 1 hour long, and which was made, I think, well, in part from, it's basically 2 things. In 1990, a West German television crew, film director Alan Barron revisiting the original locations of Blast of Silence for Wilfred Reichardt's documentary Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. But then in 2006, film historian Robert Fisher, he basically cut an hour-long version in collaboration with Reichardt and Barron. He cut an hour-long version from the unedited material, including a new interview with Barron that's, I think, done in 2006. when he did this new thing. And Barron talks. So you have Barron in 2006, and then Barron in 1990, going around New York to the different locations, kind of telling the story of Blast of Silence. So it's neat to see it from his point of view. It's neat to see Barron a little older and what he looks like now and his thoughts on the film, and it's neat to see the locations, and that comes back in the features later. But that's 1990. So he's going through, and a lot of the locations have changed in 30 years, obviously. But there's multiple, so there's the him walking and talking interviews with the locations, and then there's a sit down with him in 2006, and he's recollecting even more. But he talks about being a cartoonist and an illustrator when he was starting out, and then taking some acting classes and being drawn to the idea of filmmaking, and how he'd worked a bit in photography, but really knew very little about filmmaking when he made Blast of Silence. But his cartoonist/photo background gave him an acute sense of images and translating stories to images. Like when he would do cartoonist work, he would get a script, and he basically have to do storyboards, more or less, sometimes in terms of the cartoon format, the framing format. So he did have a sense of like what should go in the frame, and you can see that there's a sort of natural ability to find things as they should be framed, even in a shaggy, low-budget production, that I think really makes sense, and so that really benefited him. And it's neat to hear him tell the story of how he got the film got made. Like they salvaged some film equipment from a film they shot in Cuba. Various difficulties stealing shots around New York, the cops bugging him. Associates Barron he's going through New York locations and why he chose them, and the filmmakers actually kind of attempt to recreate the shots from the film, which is cool. You'll see the shot from the film, then you'll see the video 1990 version with Barron in the frame, sometimes not, and they usually do a decent job of kind of giving you an idea what it should have looked like, or if they were trying to recreate it. The film is obviously 1990 New York, and he talks about some criticisms the film received at the time. He was told some critics said he was ripping off Godard's Breathless, which Barron says he didn't see until a couple years after he made this movie, but in looking back, he could see why critics latched onto that, because the similarities were that Godard and he both used the locations in a very specific and low budget way, and it's about two criminals. So it's like he's using New York like Godard uses Paris in Breathless, and they're both black and white, and they're around the same time, so he could understand it, but he didn't see that movie. So I do think it's interesting to watch Blast of Silence close to Breathless, because I think they're an interesting pair for sure. Other features: locations revisited. In 2008, Alan Barron accompanied the Criterion collection to the locations of Blast of Silence again, and they took photos in 2008. And it's basically, with this feature, we see a clip of the film followed by an intertitle explaining the locations, and then maybe a little bit about it, followed by a still photo of that location with sometimes Alan Barron in the shot, sometimes not. Then you have on-set Polaroids, which is Polaroids that were taken during the filming of the movie, which is pretty cool. And there's some, similarly, they'll have a little clip from the movie or music from the movie. There's a great jazzy score that goes with the movie that I really like. They'll have a clip, and then they'll show a Polaroid, and some of it's behind the scenes, some of it's literally on set, some of it is stuff that's kind of like the shots in the movie. But then they'll have like little descriptions under some of them that are, I guess, transcripted from Barron's own notes on the back of each Polaroid. If he wrote, this is 113th Street and whatever, and the day that they did it, that shows up in the little description. So that's kind of cool. This includes the voiceover and the music from the movie, just like the locations revisited. So that's really cool. And I'm really, I would have included this in my favorite Blu-rays of the year, but I just got it and I wanted to do a separate video of it. So know that this is actually one of my favorites, and one that I'm so glad got an upgrade It's a really neat noir. And yeah, Lionel Stander's voice is just this really gruff voice. And it looks like, even though you know Frank Bono doesn't sound like that, it somehow fits, which I can't really explain. But I love Blast of Silence, and I'm so glad it got a nice upgrade from Criterion. So that's that. Next up, we have Mean Streets. Now, this is the 4K. This is a 4K UHD version. Again, from Criterion. New digital restoration approved by Scorsese and Thelma Schoonmaker. Looks great from that very beginning. Old school red Warner Brothers studio card, which is deceptive because it's an independent film that was picked up. So it makes it look like a Warner Brothers production. And, you know, obviously Warner Brothers is an important entity to Scorsese, who grew up with the gangster pictures of the Warner Brothers films of the 20s, 30s, you know, what have you. So it's neat that this would be part of that legacy, and it is his own version of that in a way. I mean, it's the gangsters he grew up with, you know, but it's a very personal movie. But anyway, the color and the grain and the detail look really good on this transfer, and I was really happy with the 4K. This also has a Blu-ray. So the 4K doesn't have any features really. The Blu-ray has all the supplements, but Martin Scorsese emerged as a generation-defining filmmaker with this gritty portrait of the 1970s New York City, one of the most influential works of American independent cinema, set in the insular Little Italy neighborhood of Scorsese's youth. Mean Streets follows guilt-ridden small-time ringleader Charlie, Harvey Keitel, as he deals with the debts owed by his dangerously volatile best pal Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, and pressure from his headstrong girlfriend Teresa, Amy Robinson. As their intertwined lives spiral out of control, Scorsese showcases his precocious mastery of film style, evident in everything from his propulsive editing rhythms to the lovingly curated soundtrack to create an electrifying vision of sin and redemption. Yeah, I mean, this is an early movie to use source songs in quite this way. You know, obviously there have been like Elvis musicals, and there was Scorpio Rising, I guess, some films that had done it previous to this. But the way Scorsese does it here is kind of the beginning of something really interesting in terms of using songs to now punctuate a narrative story where the songs aren't connected directly to the story. I mean, the one shot that comes right to mind is there's the opening song, there's, the song when Keitel's head hits the pillow, which is a great sequence at the beginning where he gets out of bed, he looks at himself in the mirror, and then he goes to lay down, and his head starts falling back, and we cut closer, and his head's falling further back and closer, and as he hit the pillow, we're almost in a close-up. It's a great sequence. Again, if I ever did a movie of my own, I'd always want to steal that shot, just like the shot when Charlie enters the bar, and it's all red, and he's sort of dancing to the Stones song, and the camera's kind of dancing with him on the dolly. It's just a beautiful shot, and there's so much of that, declaration of a filmmaker, not only in the story it's telling, but also in the style. And yeah, I mean, Scorsese would say, in the audio commentary, there's a selected scene audio commentary on the Blu-ray. It runs about an hour and 17 minutes of the hour and 52-minute runtime. I love his tracks, but he says something that I thought was really telling. He said, in my mind, it's not really a film. It's a kind of a declaration or statement of who I am and how I was living, thoughts and dilemmas and conflicts that were very much a part of my life to that point. So this idea of a film as declaration, personal declaration, I think is really important. And one of the great features on this is Martin Scorsese with Richard Linklater, which is an excerpted conversation originally recorded in 2011 at the Directors Guild of America for a special screening of Mean Streets. It's almost 30 minutes long. It's Linklater giving an opening speech where he talks about Mean Streets being one of the big game changer movies of cinema, really, in that it's a film that kind of inspires you to tell your own personal stories. Like, if you have one in you, it's the film that says to you, go do it. And I've said before, I think Dazed and Confused is kind of Linklater's Mean Streets. It's his response to that. It's his personal story. Very personal, very specific, and yet so universally appealing. But anyway, you get this chat between the two of them, and it's wonderful to hear Scorsese talk about a lot of the stuff that really happened to him that inspired things in Mean Streets. And yeah, I may have said this before too, but Mean Streets is a movie when I first watched it, I'd seen other Scorsese films, Taxi Driver, etc., and I didn't love Mean Streets when I first saw it. Like, I didn't get it. It was too foreign to me. As a kid from Wisconsin, I was like, I don't understand this Little Italy gangster adjacent. I don't get it. I don't understand. And since watching it more and more times, it's become one that I really think is quite a standout and one of the great, while not debut films, one of the great sort of establishing a filmmaker kind of movies. Because he had made a couple movies, but he made Boxcar Bertha for Roger Corman in 1972. And that was really pivotal because he makes that. He shows it to his friend John Cassavetes. Cassavetes says, look, I'm sorry. You just wasted, a year of your life making a piece of junk. And he's like, do you have anything else you want to tell? Any other stories? And he's like, well, yeah, I've got this thing, basically what would be Mean Streets. And Cassavetes is like, go do that. And so Boxcar Bertha births Mean Streets in a way. If he doesn't do that film, he doesn't get pushed in that direction. If he doesn't show it to Cassavetes, maybe he continues to make, exploitation films, and not get into the studio stuff. So anyway, that conversation between Linklater and Scorsese is fantastic. I really love it. It's only on the Blu-ray, as is the selected scene audio commentary, which is him and Amy Robinson. Then we have a new video essay by Imogen Sarah Smith, who I think is great. It's about 29 minutes, and it's just a beautifully written essay talking about the film while showing scenes from it, classic visual essay style, and really great, really wonderful to have that feature on this new 4K. Then we have an interview with Kent Wakeford, recorded in 2011. He was the cinematographer that shot Mean Streets, and it was his first narrative film and his first time working with Scorsese. It's about a 19-minute interview, and he reveals with the opening question that he believes about 6 minutes of the film, he timed it, he said, as it appears in the movie, is shot in New York. And he just goes on to say how he loves that a lot of critics call this one of the great New York movies. And it is that, in a way, it's about New York. But in terms of actually having New York in it, 6 minutes. Well, a lot of the other stuff is shot in and around Los Angeles, but in a way that looks like New York. Like the scene where Johnny Boy blows up the mailbox, shot in Long Beach, just really interesting stuff, how they were able to do it with so very little actual New York and a lot of interiors that could be shot anywhere. But the film is woven together in such a way as to make it feel all of a piece, all of New York. And that's pretty cool. But a neat interview with the DP. And then Mardik Martin, there's two excerpts from a documentary called Mardik, Baghdad to Hollywood, directed by Rami Katrib and Evan York, which features Mean Streets co-writer Mardik Martin, co-writer Martin Scorsese, and journalist Peter Biskind and filmmaker Amy Heckerling talking about Mean Streets for about 9.5 minutes. And then Martin Scorsese back on the block. This is a vintage featurette produced by Warner Brothers themselves in 1973 for the theatrical release of Mean Streets. It's about 7 minutes long. And among other things, it shows and talks to Scorsese and two of his friends who inspired the stories and characters of Mean Streets. So it's them sort of talking about certain situations that then we sort of see reflected in scenes from the film, and them walking through the old neighborhood and telling stories. And it's kind of neat to see these guys who you don't know, but you kind of know because you've seen Mean Streets and they've been rolled into some of these stories. But for a studio featurette at that time, I think it's pretty interesting, ultimately. And that's been on other releases before, but the combination of old and new features, the new scan, it's a really, really great version of Mean Streets and highly recommended. So pick up Mean Streets on Blu-ray and Mean Streets on 4K and Blast of Silence on Blu-ray. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.